to require states to count mail-in ballots before Election Day. Stacey Smith sat down with a congressman to learn more about the controversial bill and how it would affect the election process.
Welcome to my initial interview of Across the Table. My guest is Congressman Mike Kelly. He is the representative of the Pennsylvania 16th District in Pennsylvania. Mr. Kelly, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Stacey. Great to be with you.
You are proposing some legislation that would make changes to federal election laws, especially in regards to mail-in ballots. Why?
I don't think in our lifetime, at least in my lifetime, and we've ever had an election go quite like this one. And I have a lot of our constituents when I'm back home coming up to me said, this wasn't fair. This wasn't done the right way. I don't like the mail-in ballot. What are you guys going to do about it? And that's always the question. So what are you going to do about it? So we came back to Washington. Senator Josh Hawley had a piece that was about the same thing we were looking for, and that is restoring integrity to make sure that people really believe that these elections were fair and that every legitimate legal ballot was counted, and those that weren't legal were thrown out. And so we're trying to come up with something that makes sense, simple, and then brings that level down of the greatest victim, I believe, in this election is the loss of faith and trust that the American people have in our voting process. So we want to restore that. Harvest balloting, which people look at and say, what in the world is that? We never heard that before. Drop boxes, never heard about that before. And then other people say, yeah, but well, it's okay to have a drop box, but do you have anybody observing who's going there? So, well, no, in a lot of cases there weren't. And they say, well, that's not right. And you look at all the things that were taking place, the mail-in ballots, the provisional ballots, there were so many things out of the ordinary that it causes people to stop and ponder, and especially where we're from. The president was so strong. That Saturday before the election, he came to Butler, landed at Butler Airport, a town of 14,000, and 57,000 people showed up to see the president of the United States. That was his fourth stop that day of 5 stops across Pennsylvania. And I think the feeling was, how could a guy at the end of that day, who was almost 800,000 votes ahead, all of a sudden end up behind? And why weren't the votes counted the right way? And why were they stopped voting? And, look, calendars and clocks are supposed to matter. November the 3rd was the day, 8 o'clock in the evening was the time that the voting was supposed to stop taking place and the counting was supposed to begin. What we're talking about now is, okay, fine. Let's see where the most egregious errors were committed, and let's go and shore those up and make sure that at the end of the day, every single person feels that they voted, their vote counts, and it was counted, and that the other things that took place, whether no postmarks, no counter signatures, counting way beyond any of these times and saying, well, that's just the way it went this year. That's what we're looking at right now and trying to, again, just restore integrity to the system. I think it's pretty basic.
You say install integrity, Mr. Congressman, but are you also alleging that there was some fraud?
I would just say that any person, any clear thinking person would look at these numbers and say, statistically, we can't make this work. The numbers are just so far out there. The question comes up, well, what should we have done? And people say, well, shouldn't we have people actually sitting there watching as the votes are being counted? In some cases they were. In some cases, Republicans were not allowed in. As we know, in Philadelphia, they covered up the windows and said, if you want to take a look, you can take a look, but good luck trying to see through the coverings over the windows. And then they did say, well, okay, fine, you can watch, but you have to stand outside the building and watch. I mean, some of those things are so obvious. That's what brings up the situation where people say that this wasn't fair. And it's just so obvious what happened. But again, Stacey, just looking at the numbers, statistically, it's impossible to come up with those numbers and then look at that and say, my gosh, that just is not believable. So there's ways to do it. We think there's ways to do it. And we think that's what we need to take a look at. And right now, I think this president is entitled to every single objection he has and to pursue any route he wants to pursue to see, was it a fair election? And the people should demand that. What I'm trying to figure out, and you and I growing up, and when there's something that's called into question, and if you think you're right, and you think somebody's making an objection to what you've done, you say, come in and take a look. Come in and take a look. Shine the brightest light you can, go through it all. And if you think there's something wrong, then fine. But we have great faith and confidence that what we did was right. So please come in and take a look. In this case, it says, no. Let's just stop right now. Let's just accept the fact that those votes are in, and Trump has to stop. I go back to whenever Judge Kavanaugh was going through his Supreme Court effort. And the questions then were, if somebody said it, it must be believed. You can't question any allegations because that's not right. And there's no investigation. Just accept what's being said. In this one, this election, it's like, no, 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 just accept what happened, go home, and we'll make sure that, let's get Joe Biden inaugurated and we'll go on from there.
I have to ask this because there have been several challenges that have been taken to the courts, and each time, it seems like most of the time at least, probably 90% or more, Mr. Trump has lost in court, not only in Pennsylvania, but around the country as well.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, the courts will look at it. I mean, isn't that the process? So you make an allegation, you lodge a legal complaint, and then the courts take a look at it. And they either say, okay, fine, you're right, or you're wrong. I don't think that's unusual. I do think in this case, though, when we're looking at things, a lot of times they'll say, yeah, there's some things that were different, but there weren't enough votes there to really change the election. And then my answer to that would be, cumulatively, if you look at all the things that have gone wrong and all the things that we question, you start adding those votes up, and all of a sudden it does become a significant number of votes, and it does call into question the integrity of this past election. I don't want to look like a banana republic, and we look worse than a banana republic in a country that has the greatest technology in the world, greatest innovation in the world. We can't do elections where people come away from those and say, you know what, it was done the right way. So whether it's machines that didn't count right, whether it's envelopes that didn't have counter signatures that even looked the same, postmarks that weren't on there to show that it came in at a certain time. When you look at all those things, I think you have to question it. And I think if you're going to tamp down the belief that this was not a fair election and a lot of illegitimate votes or non-legal votes were counted, I think you want to settle that case. That's all we're trying to do, just to calm the area.
Given the way that it's going right now, you're not calling for a delay in the Electoral College vote or anything like that, correct?
No, I think what's set up is set up. There's a procedure already set up and a process set up, and I think there's time to do what we have to do between now and that deadline. So we'll see what happens. But the states have to certify it, and I think in some cases, I believe it was in Michigan, there was a certification that took place, and then the Republicans that were on that said we were really just people were coming at us, and we want to withdraw our certification. We don't want to say that we think it was right. So we'll see as those states go on, right? Because it's the states handled individually.
Yeah, that's Wayne County, which is Detroit, by the way.
Yes.
So that you're speaking of. All right, so let's take a look at your legislation. What are you proposing? Because there are critics who will say that these should be run by the state and not the federal government. Some of the things that you're proposing.
Yeah, well, they were run by the states, but if you look at Pennsylvania, for whatever reason, Act 77 in the fall, by the way, of 2019, not after the pandemic started, all of a sudden in an omnibus piece of legislation, we did this mail-in ballot thing. I would just say, look, there's so much questioning right now of what took place on November the 3rd. And as I said earlier, if calendars and clocks don't matter, then why did we use those? Why did we say on November 3rd is election day at 8 o'clock? That evening, the polls will close and then we'll start counting. And one of the things we want to do is, okay, so there was a huge number of mail-in ballots. Why did we wait till after the polls closed? We could have started counting those ballots earlier, not disclose what those numbers are. But Stacey, so November the 3rd was the voting day. And then the governor said, well, but November the 5th, November the 6th, November the 7th, we'll still be looking as long as those postmarks are there, we'll be doing that. And then they find out, well, even if the postmarks aren't there, we'll still count them. And now it's turned into day after day after day, and we're still waiting to get the final tallies. All we're trying to do is bring something that's right across the board. Anybody can look at it and say, you know what, this is fair, and this was done the right way. And I got to tell you what, I don't care which side of the aisle you're on this. The one thing we all should be looking for is that integrity in our system. When our own citizens don't trust the way we elect our officials, that's a huge problem.
Would this apply to state elections as well? I mean, let's just say the state row offices that Pennsylvania elected.
Well, you know what? That's a good question, and I think the piece that we have has to do with the. It's just called the whole, the Help America Vote Act. It's pretty basic because it does deal with this particular what happened in this election. When it does come to the state elections, I think something like that could be adopted by the state. That'd be up to the Pennsylvania legislature.
And as you brought up the
So
fact,
we're doing it from a federal standpoint, but then the state would have to determine, because in this case, Act 77 changed what was already established as election day and at what time the polls would close. And it didn't address, we already had absentee ballots that was available to us, but the mail-in ballot was something completely new. And it started actually in the fall of 2019, not after the pandemic. It wasn't because of the pandemic. It was part of an act that took place in the fall.
Your critics will also say that it was the Republican-led state legislature that said no vote should be counted before the election day.
Yeah.
And so you'd like to change that? And are you critical then of the Republican state legislature?
No, I'm not being critical. I'm just thinking, you know what, it's, I would have, of course, wasn't involved in a vote on that, on Act 77. And I would think that probably the legislature as a whole would take a look at it and say, well, there's probably some things we should amend in that. Maybe now looking back on it, there were areas we should have strengthened and we didn't. That would eliminate some of the doubt on this election. But again, I think the state legislature the state legislation acted in what they thought was the best interest of their voters. And you look at it now and say, okay, fine, we looked at it a second look, and it really doesn't seem to have accomplished what we wanted it to accomplish.
Right. So your legislation would have any mail-in ballot that came in registered right away, and that vote counted, so that on election night, those results are ready. Is that correct?
Yes. So you already have that done. So now you're not looking into weeks now after an election to try to determine the total number of votes. So that can be done way ahead of time and get that done and already have it there, instead of seeing people counting ballots all the way through the evening into the next morning. So we think this makes sense, but we'll see where it goes.
Other things that you're talking about in this legislation is prohibiting ballot harvesting. You're looking at audit of the municipal voting systems. Give me some insight on that.
Well, you know, we actually had an earlier site when it came to the drop boxes, because I thought just the exact term drop box, what does that mean? What will drop these boxes off? Is there any oversight? Well, no, not really. Again, going back to integrity and being able to establish faith and trust in the system that we use, I think was too casual. I think it was way, way, way too casual. Look, as I said earlier, we know about absentee ballots. I've cast them myself. The mail-in ballot was an altogether new concept this year. And when it comes to ballot harvesting, so whenever you start collecting ballots, harvesting ballots, and then as a voter, you're turning over your ability to cast a vote, put it in a box, and walk away knowing that took place. You're allowing somebody else to do that for you and drop it off sometime, or maybe not drop it off. Who knows? I always like the fact, I'm going to vote, I'm going to mark it, I'm going to seal it, I'm going to put it in a box. Now I know for sure. Saying, you know, somebody else can do that for me. And I think there's just something about the integrity, again, coming down to it. You know how I feel about this, because you know I've talked this before. 1.5 million Americans in uniform have died to preserve this ability for self-governance. Now we have a situation where I really do believe our responsibility as citizens are to vote, register, find out who it is that's on the ballot, cast a ballot, what you think is in the best interest of our country, and you seal that ballot and you put it in the mailbox. I think we're getting too casual, saying, no, well, somebody else can take care of it. I'm too busy. You can't be too busy to maintain the integrity that needs to be taken in these elections. This was a really big election. Look at the turnout. And we always talk about there's just not enough people turning out. A lot of people turned out this time. The most, I think, that anybody could have possibly imagined for both Mr. Biden and Mr. Trump. And I said, so there's a lot of ballots out there. Were they counted the right way? And do you have confidence now? When you put your head in the pillow at night, I went to my polling place. I checked in. I got my ballot. I marked my ballot. I put it in, and I had confidence in that. I think too many people are saying, boy, I don't have any confidence that it was handled the way I thought it should. I think it's pretty much basic. It doesn't take a deep dive when you find out whether people believe in something or don't believe in something. They know, you know, it's the old story. If it waddles like a duck and quacks like a duck, I'll bet you it's a duck. And this one, when people say, well, can you prove it? That's what the purpose of the suits right now. That's the purpose of the deeper dive, to take a look. It's not so much about who wins the election. It's about who believes that the election was fair.
Let's get down to the brass tacks of this right now. Making this bill work its way through Congress. Do you have any Democratic support for this?
Do you know what? Well, we just dropped it. And I think we'll be getting Democratic support on it. As I said earlier, look, if somebody was questioning, and I've been in business all my life, if somebody questioned the way I ran my business, said, please come in and take a look. If you think we're doing something wrong, I want you to take a look at it. You know, sunlight's the best antiseptic. So let's make sure we shed the light on it and people walk away saying, you know what? I thought it wasn't right, but now I believe it was. My questions have been served. So I think we'll get Democrats on it. I would sure hope that we would get Democrats on it. This is an election where both Republicans and Democrats and independents and libertarians have a chance to vote. I don't look at it as so much of a Republican issue. I look at it as an American issue right now. Every single American should believe that these elections are free, fair, and things get counted the way they were cast.
But you are going to have Democratic support to make this through, because obviously the Democrats retained control of the House. The Republicans did gain at least 8 House seats. Nancy Pelosi is still the House Speaker. And
my understanding,
yeah. And so what do you think your chances are of getting this bill through?
Well, I think the fact that we have a companion piece in the Senate, and the more people become aware of there's actually a piece of legislation out there, they hear about it. And I think the answer is always the same. We'll go and we'll talk to our colleagues on the Democrat side and said, we dropped this piece, would like you to be on it with us, and let them decide if they want to do it or not. Now, it still has to go through the Rules Committee. It still has to go through the Speaker, and it has to do all that before it hits the floor. That's a hard thing to do, much harder than most people would think. But this one, I think, is so logical. Why wouldn't you do it?
All right. As I just mentioned, Nancy Pelosi is House Speaker once again. The Republicans did pick up several seats. She also is being tugged from the left side of her party. How do you think Congress is going to act, and what kind of legislation might we see over the next 2 years?
Yeah, well, that's really interesting, because I think that I think Ms. Pelosi was expecting actually to expand her numbers. And I think that's one of the other things about this election. So our candidate doesn't win the presidency, but my gosh, we gain seats in the Congress. Now, that usually doesn't happen. We maintain our seats in the Senate, and we got to see what's going to happen in Georgia, which is going to be a huge national, there'll be a lot of attention there. But I think if you looked at the candidates that the Republicans ran and these candidates that won, I think the American people were really speaking loudly and clearly and saying, we don't like the idea of this really far left movement. We can do something about that, and we can do something about it in the House of Representatives, and we can do something about it in the Senate. So when you look at the seats that we were supposed to lose that we maintained, and you look at the gains that we have, and there's a good possibility that we'll be up close to somewhere around 213, maybe 214 seats when we're done. Some of these ones are still, by the way, harvest balloting out in California. So all of a sudden these things start showing up, and some of the seats that are in contention right now could come to us. We should be at 213 or 214 seats, which is an incredible gain when the top of the ticket did not. If the president doesn't win, that's hard to explain. But I don't think that it didn't work out. I think the way that Ms. Pelosi thought it was going to work out. But I also think, Stace, that a lot of the candidates that Democrats won or ran were maybe not the same candidates that Ms. Pelosi would like to see been on the ballot, but they were on the ballot. And I think America spoke pretty loudly about who they weren't willing to accept. And if you look at the socialist movement, which I think disturbed most of us, they're saying we don't want that type of candidate. We don't want that type of government.
Given what you just said, and given also the fact that Ms. Pelosi does not always have total support within her caucus, her Democratic colleagues, do you expect to see a more moderate approach coming out of Congress?
Well, I think we are going to see that, because I think the numbers are not there to get the number of votes they're going to need to really rush things through. Again, you got to go back to Georgia. I think we're going to see a more of a moderate approach from the House, but in Georgia, if Republicans lose those seats, both those seats, if they split, it's a 1-1, so it's kind of a standoff. But then the vice president, who's if the Biden-Harris ticket goes through, would be Kamala Harris would be our vice president. She would be the tiebreaker in the Senate. So I think all attention right now is on Georgia, and then after that, you'd be able to kind of determine how radical could some of the legislation be, and what would be acceptable in the House to get through there. Because I think we have a lot of moderate Democrats who are going to be looking at this. And again, if President Trump doesn't win, and at the midterms, at midterms for the party that won the presidency, it's usually a tough thing to hold their seats. So I think they'll be very cautious about what it is that they want to push through.
You touched on this a moment ago, and I'd like to bring it up, and I'm sure you're scratching your head like a lot of other people. You won your election handily, 59 to 41% in your district. Republicans in the state did fairly well, took over 2 state row offices. The congressional makeup stayed at 9-9. Across the country, Republicans did very well. And we've already talked about at least 8 seats, maybe more, picked up by Republicans. But at the same time, the top of the ticket lost. Mr. Trump lost. What happened?
I think most of what we've been talking about right now, this is a very unusual situation where we'd have the gains at the lower part of the ticket, at the top of the ticket. We would see if our president loses. That's something that I don't think, that's quite an anomaly. And people look at that also and say, doesn't that tell you something? And I would say, look, we want to look at seeing things and making sure that it was the right type of a night and the right way of counting ballots. But you bring up another part of this whole election. Most people say that can't happen. That can't happen. There's no way you can be as strong as the lower part of the ticket, and yet the president doesn't win. Usually he's the guy that pulls us all through, right? And in this case, the rest of the ticket did very well. I would tell you this though. I when I looked at my ballot, I was surprised because when I went to cast my votes, top of the ticket was Mr. Biden, Ms. Harris, and then President Trump, Mr. Pence, and then it went to the state offices the whole way down the left side, and then you go over to the right side, another column goes the whole way down, and at the very bottom was the congressional race. And my wife had said to me, she was at the next booth over, she goes, "You're not on the ticket." I said, no, go all the way to the right side, go down to the bottom. She goes, "Why aren't you beneath the presidential thing?" I said, I have no idea. Now, I don't know what it was like in other states, but I've had a lot of people come up to me and said, "That's the strangest looking ballot I've ever seen. And why was it like that?" I said, can't answer that. You need to get a hold of your state legislatures and ask them, legislators, what happened there, or find out from the election bureau. So again, to address what you said though, so how can you do so well, bottom of the ballot and the top of the ballot, not run the table, right? And that's one of the questions that you look at and say, that's another thing, that this election is so different than other elections. This is something that people had not seen before, and they question it. Again, why did that happen? And I guess there's a lot of allegations out there. I keep hearing about them every day. All we're going to try to do is approach it from a standpoint of what we can do to shore things up.
This is a 2-part question. The first part is this: given what you've just said, could it also be, Mr. Congressman, that people just decided that they didn't necessarily like some of the stuff that Mr. Trump did, like the tweets and the comments that he would make, but they happened to like what his policies were?
Yeah, but you know what? That's interesting, because I did have people that have come up to me after the election and said, congratulations, I just want you to know I voted for you. I said, well, thank you. I really appreciate that. And they said, well, I didn't vote for Trump. And I said, oh, really? They said, no. I said, well, which of his policies offended you? And they said, what do you mean? I said, well, there must have been something in his work over the last 4 years that offended you. So what was it? And they said, no, it has nothing to do with his policies. In fact, I don't know what policies that I would have been upset with. I mean, my pension's good. We got people really working until the pandemic. I just don't like him. And I said, boy, that's funny. And in our town here, apparently there was 57,000 plus people that wouldn't have agreed with you. They came that day that the president came in. Specifically, what would it be? And they just said, well, I don't know. There's just something about him I didn't like. And my answer to that is, you know what? I guess when you're in 8th and 9th grade and there's a student council election, and it's usually the quarterback or the good looking cheerleader that wins, these elections are far more important than that. And I looked at it and I said, boy, this agenda, this Make America Great Again agenda, really was very strong and made us, again, a country that the rest of the world looked at and envied. And all of a sudden, it became down to a personality thing. I said, I'm just surprised that really personality means that much. But again, I think the same thing in the previous election. A lot of people thought that both Paul Ryan and Governor Romney would have been great guys for running a business, but they thought that Barack Obama liked them. I thought, well, okay, that's fine. That's not the way I'd cast my vote, but people vote the way they want to vote. You sometimes have to scratch your head and come away from it and say, wow, it's different.
The I know you're not ready to concede it yet for Mr. Trump, but
No, not at all.
I think you know in your heart of hearts that it's probably not going to be overturned, and that Mr. Biden will be the president.
Yeah, but you know what? I remember a time in the winter years and years ago where the Steelers were playing the Raiders and it looked like it was over, and Terry Bradshaw threw a pass and it deflected off one of the Raiders, and Franco picked it up right off his shoe tops and ran it into the end zone. And I said, you know what? It ain't over till it's over. As
Yeah.
long as there's 1 second on the clock, I think you run it. I love this thing. You got to play it through the echo of the whistle, and you got to keep looking. We're from Pittsburgh. We never give up. I tell you, our black and gold. I don't care. I don't care what the score is. I don't know what the time on the clock is. If we have 1 tick left, we're going to play it. We're never going to walk off that field when we have time on the clock. And I think, my goodness, this is a very important issue, the presidency of the United States. And I think that people should look at it and say, you know what, let's take that extra time. It didn't seem to bother us with Bush Gore. We went way past Thanksgiving into December. I don't know on this one. Now, not you, but the media is just so damn driven. You guys got to walk away from this. You guys got to walk away from this. I said, you guys have hounded this guy since he came down that escalator every single day. You've been tearing at him. I mean, you put him through false accusations, this Russia collusion. You impeached the guy. And you know what? He's like those little dolls we used to get when we were little. Remember those blow up Joe Palooka dolls, and you'd punch it and it'd come right back up at you? This president is stronger than 10 acres of garlic. He is going to play it through the echo of the whistle, and he's going to look when the time's up on the clock, and if the score is the score, that's fine. But until that time, it's still in contention.
I'm not to put a pen in your balloon here, but Franco Harris endorsed Joe Biden. So
yeah, well, that's the beauty of the country we live in.
I know.
You don't have to get every vote; you just have to get 1 vote more than the guy you're running against.
Yeah, exactly. All right. Moving on from this, if Joe Biden is the president, if you will concede that much, what role will Donald Trump play for the Republican Party moving forward?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I'll tell you what, I'm sure there's a lot of the old guard Republicans that never did accept the fact that Mr. Trump ran as a Republican and won the presidency as a Republican. Quite a few of them were very, very happy to go out and make public endorsements for Mr. Biden and against our president. I think that the reality of it is, when 70 some million people vote for your candidate, you got to take a pretty good long look at that and say, you know what, the party is going in a little different direction. And while a lot of the old guard did not believe in Donald Trump, his policies sure made sense to America. I think we need to take a look. And Republicans, I look at us now, I think we're such a different party. I'm an Irish Catholic. Every single Kelly, until my dad went to work for Chevrolet after the war, World War II, by the way. Every one of us we were all Democrats. We were blue collar, we were Democrats, and that's what we were, Irish Catholics. I just think that right now, if you look at it really, I think the Republican Party has become more the party of the blue collar worker, maybe not the union leadership, because once you set your course, it's hard to change it. But I think when people look at who we are, lower taxes, a stronger military, a stronger economy, looking at fossil fuels and saying, that's what's put us in a position where the greatest producer of energy in the world. We don't have to rely on any bad actors to supply us. And then the other side says, no, we have to get away from that and do something else. I think when people take a look, especially the people where we're from, they look at it differently. And I think the Republican Party right now appeals to some of those people where it was generational for years for all of us to be a Republican or a Democrat. And I think that people are now looking at what policies are being pushed by the different parties. And I think Mr. Trump has started something here that people have great faith in. Stacey, you can't get those many votes, and you can't, anybody that traveled in Western Pennsylvania, the president was extremely popular, and a lot of things changed under his leadership that our area had been looking at for years. This energy revival has just been incredible. I don't want to ever see that go away. Those are jobs, and a much brighter future for America.
Would you encourage him to run in 4 years?
You know what? I don't know that he'd need my encouragement. I'm hoping he encourages me to run 4 years. I'd like to see him come back. I really would. I'd like to see him come back. I think he's different than anybody we've ever seen before. And I think a lot of people would agree with that, but different in a positive way. Most of the time after presidents have their first term, they look like they're ready to be he walked and put a blanket over and let them cool down a little bit. He looks younger, and his energy level, as I told you, right, as we were kind of following him around Pennsylvania, I never saw a man work harder than this president did. And it was like it didn't matter what time of the day it was. This guy would get up early and work all through the day and then get on an airplane and work all night. I just think he has an energy level that most of us envy and admire. So I hope that he takes a look at it. But it'll be interesting to see who else comes along. We have some very strong people coming up and a very diverse group of people coming up. So we'll see. Well, talent always makes its way to the top, right? That's the one thing we love. I mean, you and I really enjoy sports because usually at the end of the day, you've got a lot of talented people playing and trying to get the same position. And at the end of the day, the person who performs the best gets the starting role. I think we're going to see that again. And I don't know that this president will ever walk away from public service. He's got a taste of it. And I think he's done a marvelous job with, by the way, very little backing from traditional backers of their parties. So I would not be surprised if he ran again. And depending on his health and what his family thinks too. Listen, it takes a toll on you.
When Mr. Biden is sworn in and he comes out with his agenda and what he would like to do you expect Republicans to look at each piece of legislation and make a determination, or will there just be a determination that we're going to oppose anything the Biden administration wants?
You know what? I would hope that we get beyond the politics and start looking at good policy for the people we represent. I don't care if it's a Republican idea, a Democrat idea, or somebody, a libertarian, or a good idea is a good idea. And I would hope that we get beyond some of this stuff. Well, if it's not from my party, I can't look at it. I think that's the damn dumbest thing you could ever do. The way we were raised, look, good ideas are good ideas. And if good ideas help other people and help yourself, and you look at it and say, you know what, I can be on something like that. I have no reason to walk away from that. I am concerned, though, when it comes to energy, because this is the renaissance in our part of the state and what's happened in America with energy. I would hate to see that we're going to turn away from our old standards that now make us the biggest producer of energy in the world and totally independent of any other bad actors. I would like to think that those things that make us strong, we need to make even stronger. And we do have some things that we need to do. Infrastructure really comes to my mind very quickly. We have an aging infrastructure. We have the ability to do these things. If we can't do it in America, it can't be done anywhere in the world. So I would hope that if Joe Biden is our president, and he comes out with policy that makes sense for the people I represent in Pennsylvania, I'm going to be on board with it. I have no reason not to be. Now, there'll be people who say, well, but if these are really far out policies, I'm sure I'm going to take a look at it. But by the same token, if it's good for the people I represent, then it's good. It doesn't have to be my idea, but if it's somebody's idea that to me makes sense, I'm going to take a long look at it. And if I can support it, I'm going to support it.
Mr. Kelly, Congressman Kelly, thank you so much for being with me.
Mr. Smith, thank you so much. It's just the table. Hey, Stacey, it's just Mike. Come on, it's just Mike.
I know that. But thanks so much for being our first guest on Across the Table, and we'll talk with you soon.
Yesterday, we spoke with election attorney Matt Haverstick. Here was his response on legal concerns surrounding the bill.
Congressman Mike Kelly out here in Western Pennsylvania has introduced a bill that he's calling the Election Integrity Act. And essentially, it has a number of requirements. I wondered if I could get your opinion simply on some of these provisions. One of which is that mail-in ballots ought to be counted when received. Now, the results wouldn't be made public until after the polls had closed. But in order to avoid this lengthy post-election counting process, that ballots, as in states like Florida, should be started to be counted earlier. What's your view on that kind of a provision?
I think something like that deserves a really hard look. I mean, understand we're in Pennsylvania, really this election kicking the tires on a broad use of the mail-in ballot. And I can tell you from personal experience in some of the races we've seen and from watching you and reading the newspaper, other problems are cropping up all over the state. I don't think it means that anyone intended to do anything wrong. It's just a brand new system. And there's some issues that we see as we go through it the first time. And one of them is this slowdown in getting things counted. I think that there's some room for coming up with a way to begin canvassing some of these mail-in ballots prior to election day, as long as we preserve the ability to make sure that there's a way to weed out the invalid ones, either at the front end or after election day. It's important. Again, we saw that with all these mail-in ballots, a lot of people made mistakes. There were some errors made. People send in ballots from districts in which they no longer live, things like that. So I think there's room for some improvements that could go along with perhaps an earlier tally.
Well, one of his proposals is that there be a camera, a video recording of the whole processing of these ballots from beginning to end. Do you think that's a good approach?
I think that ought to be looked at too. I was in Allegheny County for some of the counting after Election Day, and in some counties you get really good access, and you can see what's going on. Westmoreland's like that, I think. In other counties, because of the geometry or the geography of the room, it's hard to see. It's hard to see some of these things. I think if nothing else, an idea like that would serve to give the public confidence that there's really nothing wrong going on, which I think by and large is how our elections are conducted. There really isn't anything nefarious happening, but it's good for people to be able to see it for themselves.
It's time to fight. Oh my God, oh my God. Oh dear God. Oh boy.
The Good Fight.